The lights dim across a battered continent, yet in the hush, a new command circuit clicks alive. Telegrams carve the map into rival shapes, while typewriters hammer a rhythm that will outlast the smoke. What happens when a mere information office becomes the metronome of a political bloc? In September 1947, in the mountain resort of Szklarska Poręba, delegates crowd a wooden hall thick with coal dust and resolve. Why does a speech split the world into two camps and turn geography into discipline? Andrei Zhdanov outlines an imperialist camp and a democratic camp, transforming borders into lines of obedience and newsrooms into relays. Who sits at the table, and why does every chair carry the weight of a continent? Parties from the Soviet Union, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria join hands with mass parties from France and Italy, while Yugoslavia still nods in step. How does a bulletin become a bolt that tightens an entire frame? From a Belgrade office, a new periodical rolls off the press for lasting peace, for people's democracy, turning phrases into screws that bind doctrine to routine. Why reply to the Marshall Plan with stories rather than steel? Because 1947 demands bread and meaning together, and the West ships grain faster than a counter-argument, unless the counter-argument is everywhere at once. What does that look like in the rail yards, where the plan arrives by the wagon load? In Paris and Genoa, men in heavy coats unload crates marked with aid, while Union loudspeakers crackle with a different arithmetic of loyalty and dependence. How does the term people's democracy move from slogan to circuitry? Coalitions are narrowed, rival newspapers folded, and party schools tune vocabulary so that each article strikes the same note in Warsaw, Sofia, and Prague. Why is Yugoslavia the first fault line in a wall that claims to have none? Tito wants autonomy shaped by mountains and harbors, and the echo that returns from Belgrade is a refusal as geographic as it is political. What does exclusion mean when it lands on a hot June afternoon in 1948? A resolution denounces the Yugoslav party, the Kominform shifts its seat to Bucharest, and the warning reverberates through every committee room east of the Elbe. How do show trials teach the grammar of obedience? Budapest in 1949 and Prague in 1952 stage lessons where microphones, lamps, and transcripts arrange guilt as if it were an equation solved under bright light. Why is coordination of words as decisive as allocation of coal? Because a synchronized lexicon lets factories anticipate tomorrow's headline and ministers predict a strike's meaning before the first whistle blows. What happens in the West, where the line must contend with lunch pails and ballots? French and Italian communists juggle pay demands and doctrine while cabinets wobble, and the press discovers that ideology can travel as far as a radio wave. How does the economic spine of the bloc interlock with the narrative ribs? Comecon channels trade in planned corridors, while the Kominform drafts the captions that explain why each shipment is proof of a common future. Why do rituals matter if everyone insists they are realists? Peace congresses, culture evenings, youth parades generate batteries of belonging that charge the week with the same slogan from Vienna to Warsaw. What is gained by painting the adversary as a single monolith? The two-camp doctrine refracts Western contradictions into one silhouette, while Eastern contrasts are retold as useful variations along a straight road. How does the language of production become theater without actors knowing their roles? Plan, norm, fulfillment, overfulfillment, and solidarity step onto factory notice boards like characters whose lines are measured in percentages and shifts. Why is speed the unseen protagonist of this story? Between 1947 and 1956, telegrams outrun coal trains, and the first interpretation of any event anchors the price of every later correction. What does the Korean War change in offices far from the front? Maps on European walls sprout pins and strings while radios hum, and the identical commentary glides from printing press to party cell within a day. How does the Warsaw Pact complete an architecture already audible in newspaper cadence? In 1955, the military frame arrives, but the semantic cement had long since hardened, ensuring that words like aggression and peace stay inside fenced meanings. Why dissolve the Kominform in 1956 if the method works? De-Stalinization requires flexibility, and an office that symbolizes rigid alignment cannot coexist with a policy that must admit error and nuance. What remains when the sign on the door comes down and the clerks tape shut the last box? The habits remain, carried by ministries, schools, conferences, habits that can order signals without needing the old switchboard. How does the Yugoslav rupture keep teaching long after the dust settles? It proves that coastlines and river basins bend commands, and that durable alliances make room for echoes rather than mistaking them for treason every time. Why is language both a frontier and a bridge in this machinery? Each country owns untranslatable words, yet a shared melody forces them to march, and the risk is that robustness turns to rigidity before anyone notices the crack. What do we learn when we follow a headline from a capital to a provincial newsroom? We learn that distance shrinks when the lexicon is standardized, and that a copy desk can be as strategic as a rail junction in a tight winter. Why does this matter now when our feeds move faster than any wire service ever did? Because cadence, framing, and simultaneity still decide which story lands first and which becomes an afterthought even when it is more accurate. How do present crises replay the old score with new instruments? Energy shocks, sanctions, information attacks all summon coordination centers that do not bear the old name yet breathe the same logic of aligned timing. What is the price of perfect synchrony when doubt is the only tool that finds hairline faults? The price is blindness that declares questions an enemy and mistakes silence for safety long after the machinery begins to hum off key. How should a society balance cohesion with correction without breaking the frame? By accepting that unity is a means, not a sacrament, and that credibility grows when a system proves it can shift a paragraph without losing the plot. Why did the Marshall Plan force the Kominform to master narrative logistics? Because ships and trucks deliver quickly, and only an omnipresent explanation can challenge a crate that speaks in flour and light bulbs. What happens in a factory when the turbine starts after months of slogans? The story remembers the slogan as the spark, and the ledger counts the kilowatts, while both together harden a sense of purpose that survives another shortage. Why were France and Italy the most delicate instruments in this orchestra? They held the largest communist parties in the West, woven into unions and newspapers, and every strike there tuned the entire ensemble's reputation. How did place determine the pulse of decisions after the move to Bucharest? Proximity to Prague, Budapest, and Sofia compressed consultation into habit, and habit tightened response time until yesterday's formula became today's directive. What keeps the method alive after the curtain falls on the office? A common vocabulary traveling on many rails keeps schedules aligned, and alignment remains power when turbulence arrives without warning. Why end with a word that everyone approves even when the streets bristle with rifles? Peace is the perfect container for any claim, and whoever claims it first defines the other as disturbance and prepares the stage for intervention. What is the final pulse we can hear in this machinery once the room empties? That coordination can protect so long as it does not smother, and diversity can renew so long as it does not drift without anchor or aim. What question refuses to grow old when we compare then and now? Whether we can hold cadence and doubt in balance, or whether we will relearn the hard way that excessive synchrony makes the silence dangerous.